The knock came at 6:40 in the morning. 3 soft raps, spaced the way you knock when you are hoping the person inside is already awake. My granddaughter stood on the step with frost on the shoulders of a denim jacket that was nowhere near warm enough for October. A duffel bag in one hand, in the other, a sheet of notebook paper folded into quarters and gone soft at the creases from handling. She did not say good morning. She asked if she could live in my garage. Then she walked past me, laid the paper flat on my kitchen table, smoothed it with the side of her hand, and I looked down at what she had drawn on it. My name is Hollis Kern. I am 73 years old. For 38 years, I was a court stenographer in Clark County, Ohio. My wife, Iris, has been gone 4 years this spring. Before I go further, tell me in the comments what town you are listening from tonight, because I like knowing where this voice ends up. And if this is the kind of story you came for, leave a like and subscribe. To understand what was on that paper, you have to go back to the February before it. I did not know that then, so we start where I started, in my kitchen, at 20 minutes to 7 in the morning. The drawing was a floor plan. My garage measured 18 feet by 22, drawn to scale in pencil, with the water heater in the corner marked as a small square, and the word heater printed beside it in careful block letters. She had drawn the workbench along the north wall. She had drawn my truck, and then crossed it out, and written, "Park outside" with an arrow. In the southeast corner, against the wall that backs up to my kitchen, she had drawn a rectangle, 6 feet by 3, and labeled it M.E. At the bottom of the page, underlined twice, she had written, "Door that locks from the inside." I have read a great many documents in my life. I have sat 4 feet from men explaining why they burned down their own businesses. I have written down, word for word, a woman telling a judge what her husband did to her on a Tuesday. I thought I had lost the ability to be surprised by paper. I stood in my kitchen, in my robe, at 20 minutes to 7 in the morning, and I could not make my hands do anything. Marlo was 19. She is my daughter Georgia's girl, my only grandchild, and she had been standing in my kitchen for about 90 seconds, without once looking at the window over the sink. I asked her what was going on. She said she needed a place to sleep for a while. I told her the house has 3 bedrooms, and 2 of them have been empty for 4 years. She shook her head. "Not the house," she said. "The garage." I asked her why on earth the garage. Marlo said, in a flat voice with no shake in it at all, that the garage has 1 door, and the house has 4, and she could not sleep in a place with 4 doors. I want you to understand something about my granddaughter, because everything that happened later depends on it. She is not a dramatic girl. She was the child who read the entire instruction booklet before she would touch a board game. When she was 9 years old, she sat on my basement steps and asked what the machine on my desk was, and I showed her the stenotype, and I told her the keys do not spell letters, they spell sounds, and you press them all at once like a chord on a piano. Most children lose interest inside 10 minutes. Marlo made me write out the alphabet chart. She took it home. 3 weeks later, she came back and wrote her own name in machine shorthand on the back of a church bulletin, and she had it right, and she looked up at me like she had picked a lock. For 2 years after that, she and I passed notes in steno, grocery lists, jokes about her mother's meatloaf. It was our thing, and then she turned 12 and got a phone and it stopped, the way those things stop, and I had not thought about it in years. That October morning, I did not think about it either. I looked at a floor plan of my garage with a rectangle labeled M.E., and I did the only thing a man can do at that hour. I made coffee. She drank 2 cups black and did not eat. Her hands were fine. Her eyes were not. There is a particular kind of tired that has nothing to do with sleepiness, where a person looks at you and there is a delay, a half-second of travel time, like the words have to cross water to reach them. I asked her when she had last slept. Marlowe counted on her fingers, which frightened me more than the paper had. She said Wednesday. It was Saturday. I asked if she was hurt. She said no. I asked if she was in trouble. She said no. And then, after a pause I did not like, she said, "Not the kind you mean." I asked her what her mother thought about this plan. That was the first time I saw it. Her whole face closed, the way a hand closes. She said her mother would call before 10. I told her that if she was going to sleep in my garage, I was not going to let her do it on a concrete floor in October. I got the space heater from the hall closet. I carried out the folding cot that Iris kept for grandchildren, who never came in the numbers she had hoped for. I found the good sleeping bag, the one rated for winter camping, and an extension cord, and the lamp from the guest room. Marlowe walked the perimeter of the garage twice before she would put anything down. She checked the side window. It is a small window, 30 inches wide, painted shut since the Clinton administration. She pushed on it hard enough that her palms left 2 clean marks in the dust. Then she looked at the door that connects the garage to my kitchen. It has a knob lock and nothing else. She asked if I had a bolt. I told her I had a bolt in the coffee can with the hinges in it, and I had a drill, and I could put it on for her. Marlowe said she would do it herself. She did. She was out there an hour. She drilled the pilot holes crooked, and then filled them, and did them again, and she got the strike plate seated square on the second try, and when she was done, she stood inside the garage and slid the bolt shut, and I stood in my kitchen on the other side of that door and heard it go home with a sound like a small bone setting. I want to be honest with you about what I felt, standing there. It was not fear. It was relief. My granddaughter had gone quiet for 8 months. She had not answered a birthday call, and now she was 40 feet from me, behind a bolt she had installed with her own hands. Whatever was chasing her, it was outside my house, and she was inside it. I have had 2 years to think about that morning. Here is what I got wrong. I thought the bolt meant she was safe now. It did not mean that. It meant she had already been somewhere she was not safe, and had learned what the exits were, and had come to the only place she could think of where the count was 1. Georgia called at 9:50. I answered, standing at the sink, watching the garage through the window over it, with the water running so I would have a reason to sound distracted. My daughter's voice was pitched high and rehearsed. She asked if Marlowe was there. I said she was. Georgia let out a breath and said, "Thank God." And then she said something that I would go back to 100 times over the next 2 months. She said, "Dad, whatever she tells you, she is not well right now, and you need to not believe the first thing that comes out of her mouth." I asked what that meant. My daughter said they had been dealing with this for months. She said Marlowe had stopped taking her medication. She used the word episodes. She said Marlowe had taken money out of the kitchen drawer. She said Marlowe had accused Trent of things. I asked what things. There was a pause on that line that lasted 3 seconds. I know it lasted 3 seconds, because a stenographer counts pauses the way a carpenter reads a level, without deciding to. 3 seconds is a long time in a conversation between a father and a daughter. Georgia said, "Things that did not happen." Then she said they were coming over. I told her the girl had not slept since Wednesday and needed the day. My daughter said they would be there by 11 and hung up before I could answer. And that was not like her either. I dried my hands. I went out to the garage and knocked. And I heard the bolt slide. And Marlo opened the door about 6 inches, with the chain of her own arm across it. And the first thing she said was not hello. She asked if he was coming. Not they. He. They pulled in at 4 minutes past 11. Georgia drove. My son-in-law rode in the passenger seat with a leather folder on his knees. And he waited for the car to stop before he opened the door. And he buttoned his jacket in my driveway like a man arriving at a meeting he had scheduled. Trent Fowler was 49 years old that fall. He was the administrator of Cardinal Meadow, an assisted living and memory care facility out on the state route. 81 beds, the kind of building with a fountain in the entry and a fireplace that runs on a switch. He had married my daughter 4 years after Marlo's father died, and I had spent those years failing to find a reason to dislike him. He remembered names. He fixed Georgia's gutters. He called me sir, in a way that did not sound like mockery. I have gone back through my own memory of him, looking for the moment I should have known, and I cannot find one. That is the part that still keeps me up. He was pleasant for 7 years, and then he was not, and there was no seam in between. I let them in. Marlo stayed in the garage. I did not tell her to, and she did not ask. Georgia hugged me, and her hands were shaking, and her eyes were red, and that was real. I want to be fair. Whatever else my daughter did, the crying was real. Trent sat at my kitchen table, in Iris's chair, which he could not have known, and set the leather folder in front of him, and did not open it right away. He asked me how I was sleeping. He asked about my knee. He let a full minute go by, being a decent man in my kitchen. Then he said they needed to talk to me about Marlo, and that it would be easier if I saw the paperwork before we discussed it, because people do not believe this sort of thing when they only hear it. He opened the folder and slid the first document across my table. It was a psychiatric evaluation, 4 pages. Letterhead from a practice in Springfield I had never heard of. It was dated September the 12th, which was 29 days before that morning, and it was signed by a physician named Amos Litchfield, M.D. I read it standing up. I read it the way I used to proof a transcript, which is not the way most people read. Most people read for meaning. I read for what is on the page. The evaluation described a 19-year-old female with disordered sleep, paranoid ideation, auditory disturbance, and a pattern of confabulation. It used the phrase persecutory beliefs regarding family members 3 separate times. It noted an emergency department visit on August the 2nd and a second visit on August the 29th. It recommended, in the last paragraph, that the patient lacked the present capacity to manage her own medical care, finances, and residence. Trent watched me read it. He did not rush me. I put it down and asked him one question. I asked him how many times Dr. Litchfield had met my granddaughter. Trent said the evaluation reflected a full clinical picture, including collateral history. I said that was not what I asked. Georgia said, from the counter, that Marlo would not go to appointments. She said it fast, like she was covering a hole in the floor. Trent slid the second document across. It was a consent form. Authorization for evaluation and release of records. At the bottom, on the signature line, was my granddaughter's handwriting. I know her handwriting. She writes her M like 2 mountains, with a valley that does not reach the baseline. It was her signature. That is what I want you to understand, because for weeks I chased the wrong end of this. It was not forged. She signed it. The third document was the one that changed the temperature in my kitchen. It was a petition. Case number, caption, County seal in the corner, where the clerk stamps it. In the probate court of Clark County, Ohio. Application for appointment of guardian of alleged incompetent. Applicant, Trent A. Fowler. Respondent, Marlo J. Hale. It had been filed 9 days earlier. There was a hearing date typed in the box. The 20th of October, 9 in the morning, before Judge Hattie Surratt. I have watched several hundred people receive bad news in a room where I was writing it down. There is a physical thing that happens. The chest goes first. I felt my own chest do it, and I put both hands flat on my own kitchen table. I asked why nobody had told me. Georgia started to cry properly then. Trent said, in a voice that had care all through it, that they had not wanted to put this on me at my age. He said guardianship sounds worse than it is. He said it is a protective structure, not a punishment. He said with the right guardian in place, Marlo could be stabilized, get consistent treatment, stop cycling in and out of emergency rooms. He said the word stabilized 4 times in 11 minutes. I know, because 2 hours later, I wrote the entire conversation out from memory, and I counted. Then he said the thing I did not react to, and I should have. He said that once the court appointed him, the accusations would stop mattering. Not stop mattering. I asked to speak to my daughter alone. Trent stood up and said of course, and he took his coffee out to my front porch, and through the window I watched my son-in-law stand in my yard on a cold morning and look at my garage for a long time without moving. Georgia sat down across from me and put her face in her hands. I asked her, quietly, what Marlo had accused him of. My daughter said it did not matter, because none of it was real. I said it mattered to me. Georgia said Marlo had told her, in July, that Trent had been in her room at night. I did not move. Then Georgia said the rest, and this is where the whole shape of the next 2 months got set. She said she had asked Marlo what he did, and Marlo said he did not do anything. He came in, and he stood by the bed, and he put something on her nightstand, and he left. And when Georgia asked her what he put there, Marlo could not tell her. She said she woke up, and the glass was in a different place. Georgia looked at me with her mascara ruined and said, "Dad, do you hear it? Do you hear how that sounds?" I did hear how it sounded. That is the trap. It sounded like a sick girl. And here is what I did not know. Sitting at my own table, with the petition in my hand, I did not know that it was the single most accurate sentence anybody said in my house that year. I told Georgia I wanted to speak to Marlo before anyone decided anything. She said Marlo would not come out. I said then I would go in. I went out through the kitchen door to the garage and knocked twice. There was no answer. I said her name. Nothing. I put my ear to the door and heard the space heater running, and nothing else. And for about 4 seconds, I had a thought that put ice in my arms. Then the bolt slid, and she opened it, and she had been standing right behind that door the whole time, close enough to hear every word we had said through it. Her face was wet. She said one sentence to me before she shut the door again. She said, "If I tell you, you are in it too." They left at 12:30. Trent shook my hand on the porch and told me to take my time with it, and that there was no hurry, and that the hearing was still 9 days out. 9 days. He said it the way a man says a number he has been carrying around in his mouth. When their car turned onto the road, I went back inside and stood in my kitchen and did not know what to do with my hands. So I did the thing I have done since I was 31 years old and did not know what to do with my hands. I went down to the basement and got the machine. It is a Stentura, steel gray, older than my daughter. I had not touched it in 4 years, because the last thing I ever wrote on it was the deposition of a man in a slip-and-fall case in Xenia, and then Iris got her diagnosis, and I never went back to work. The tripod legs were still folded the way I fold them. The keys still had the shine worn onto them in the exact places my fingers go. I set it up on the kitchen table. I put a legal pad beside it, and at 12:51, on the 11th of October, I began a record. I wrote out the entire conversation. Every question, every answer, every pause I could account for. When you have taken verbatim notes for 4 decades, a conversation does not leave you for about 6 hours, and if you sit down inside that window, you can get better than 90% of it. I got it. Then I read it back on paper, and I dated it, and I initialed the corner, and I put it in a manila folder, and I labeled the folder in pencil, the way Iris used to label everything in this house. That folder was 1 page thick that afternoon. By the end of it, it was 406. I did not have a plan. I want to say that plainly, because I have heard people tell these stories as though they knew from the first hour what they were building. I did not know anything. A man had sat in my wife's chair and shown me a court filing about my grandchild, and I had nothing to fight it with. So I did the only thing I am good at. I started writing down what was true. That night I took a plate out to the garage, chicken and rice and a glass of milk. Marlo opened the door and took the plate and did not invite me in. I asked her one question. I asked whether the things in the evaluation were true. Not whether she was crazy, whether the facts were true. She went through them with me, standing in the door with the plate in her hands, in the cold, and it took 11 minutes. The August 2nd emergency department visit. True. She had woken up on the bathroom floor at 4 in the morning, with her cheek against the tile, and no memory of getting there, and Georgia had driven her in, and they had run a panel, and given her fluids, and sent her home at 6:40, with a diagnosis of syncope, probable dehydration. The August 29th visit. True. She had fallen on the back steps and split her chin, and they had put in 4 stitches. She said she did not trip. She said her left leg did not do what she told it to do. Money out of the kitchen drawer. True. $60. She said she took it because she was going to get on a bus. She never said where. Paranoid ideation regarding family members. She looked at me when she got to that one, and did not answer. Auditory disturbance. She said, she does hear a sound. She said, it happens at night, and it is a hum, low, like a refrigerator in the next room. She said her mother told her there is no sound. I asked her, then, if she was taking any medication. Marlo said no. I asked if she had ever been prescribed any. She said no. She said she had never seen a psychiatrist in her life. She said she had never met a doctor named Litchfield. Now, sit with that for a second, the way I had to. Because either my granddaughter was a girl so far gone that she could not remember her own appointments, which is what the folder on my table said, or a physician in Springfield had produced 4 pages of clinical narrative about a patient he had never examined. At 73, with 2 hours of information, I could not tell you which. I want to be honest about that. I looked at my grandchild in a doorway in the cold, and I did not know. What I knew was that she had asked for a room with 1 door. I asked her if she would stay. She said she would stay as long as I did not make her go inside the house. I said the garage was hers. Then she handed me back the plate, and I saw her forearm. The sleeve of her sweatshirt had ridden up when she reached out. On the inside of her left elbow, there were 3 bruises, yellow-green, the old kind, arranged in a line with about an inch between them. Not finger marks. Not a grab. Anybody who has spent time in a hospital knows what a row of healing venipuncture bruises looks like. I asked her when she had blood drawn. Marlo looked down at her own arm, like it belonged to a stranger. She said August, at the emergency room. I said that was 6 weeks ago, and these were more recent than that, and there were 3 of them. My granddaughter stood in my garage doorway and looked at the inside of her own elbow and said, in a small voice with the bottom out of it, "I do not know. I did not sleep that night." I sat in the kitchen with the light off and the machine on the table. And I could see the strip of light under the garage door. And around 2 in the morning it went out. And I sat there another hour. Monday morning, I drove to the courthouse. I want to tell you something about a courthouse when you have worked in one for 38 years. You are furniture. You are not a lawyer. You are not a party. You are not press. You are the person in the corner who makes the record. And if you do it right, nobody remembers you were there. That is the job. For 38 years, I was the most forgettable man in every room I entered. It turns out, that is a useful thing to be. Loretta Bynum has run the probate window since 1994. She has grandchildren of her own and a coffee mug that says she has heard it all. She saw me come through the door, and her whole face did something complicated, which told me she already knew. I asked for the file. It is a public record. She pulled it in 4 minutes. Case number 20-GD-0447. Application for appointment of guardian of alleged incompetent. Filed the 2nd of October. Statement of expert evaluation attached. Dr. Amos Litchfield. Waiver of notice attempted and not obtained. Next of kin listed as Georgia Fowler, mother. Trent Fowler, stepfather. I was not on it. A grandfather is not a required party in an Ohio guardianship. I knew that. I had written down 20 of these hearings in my career. But there is knowing a rule, and there is standing at a counter, reading a document about your only grandchild that does not have your name anywhere in it. Then I turned to the affidavits, and I found the 4th one. 3 I expected. Georgia's, Trent's, Litchfield's expert statement. The 4th was 2 pages, sworn and notarized on September the 29th, and it was signed by a woman named Cheryl Deitz, RN. I had never heard the name. I read it standing at the window with Loretta, watching me over her glasses. In it, Cheryl Deitz swore that she had known the respondent in a professional setting, that she had observed the respondent to be confused, tearful, and disoriented during work hours, that the respondent had accused coworkers of theft on at least 2 occasions without evidence, that in the affiant's professional nursing judgment, the respondent was a danger to herself. At the bottom of the 2nd page, under the signature, was her title, Director of Nursing, Cardinal Meadow Senior Living. I put the file down on the counter, and I asked Loretta for a copy of everything, and she made it, and she charged me $2.10, and I paid her in change, out of my coat pocket, with my hands not working right. Because my granddaughter had worked at Cardinal Meadow, and I had not known that either. I did not go straight home. I sat in my truck in the courthouse lot with the copies on the passenger seat, and I made myself think it through in order, the way you check a transcript against your notes. My granddaughter had worked at Cardinal Meadow. I had not been told. Georgia had not mentioned it in any phone call I could remember. Marlo had not mentioned it, and Marlo used to tell me about the checkout girl who overcharged her for grapes. The director of nursing at that building had sworn out a statement against her. The administrator of that building had filed to become her guardian. The doctor who wrote the expert evaluation was named Litchfield. and I did not yet know what he was to Cardinal Meadow. But I had a guess, and the guess turned out to be right. Amos Litchfield was the facility's medical director. $1,200 a month, on retainer, signing off on 81 care plans he mostly did not read. 3 of the 4 people asking a judge to declare my grandchild incompetent worked in the same building, on the same state route. That is not a coincidence. That is an address. I drove home the long way, past the fairgrounds, and I started building a theory, and the theory was wrong, and it cost me 5 weeks. Here is the theory, and I would like you to hear why it was reasonable. Marlowe's father, Danny Hale, died when she was 8 years old. He worked at a stamping plant in Urbana, and a press cycled while his arm was in it, and he bled out on the floor before the squad arrived. There was a lawsuit. It settled in 2016 for an amount that everybody in the family knew and nobody in the family said out loud. $412,000, structured. Payments to Marlowe beginning at 21, then annually, with a lump at 30. She would turn 21 in 14 months. So there it was. A girl with money coming. A stepfather asking a court to make him the person who controls her medical care, her residence, and her finances. Sign here, and in 14 months, a bank starts sending checks to a man with authority over her. I sat with that at my kitchen table Monday night, and I felt something I had not felt since Iris got sick, which is the feeling of understanding a problem. It is a warm feeling. It is also, I have learned, the most dangerous feeling there is, because once a man believes he understands a thing, he stops looking at the parts that do not fit. 2 parts did not fit, and I set them aside for 5 weeks. 1. The bruises on the inside of her arm. 2. A bolt on a door. You do not need a bolt to keep a court order out. Tuesday, I called a lawyer. Not the kind in a glass building with a receptionist. Junie Ashcraft had done probate work in this county since 1981, out of a converted dental office on Limestone Street, and the waiting room still had the little window where the hygienist used to sit. She is 68, and she wears reading glasses on a chain, and she talked to me for an hour and 15 minutes and billed me for one. She read the file twice. Then she took her glasses off and told me 3 things. The first was that Marlowe had a right to counsel and to an independent evaluator, and that almost nobody exercises it, because the respondent in these cases is usually 84 and cannot follow what is happening. Marlowe was 19 and could follow it. That mattered. The second was that the 20th was not going to be the real hearing. If we entered an appearance and asked for an independent evaluation, we would get a continuance, and a continuance in Judge Sarrett's court in October means a date in December. The third was the one that changed how I breathed. Junie said, "Mr. Kern, understand what an emergency motion is. If at any point they can put facts in front of that judge, suggesting your granddaughter is in immediate danger, the court can appoint an interim guardian, without a full hearing, ex parte, in an afternoon." She said she had seen it done in 90 minutes. I asked what kind of facts. Junie Ashcraft looked at me over the top of her glasses and said, "A fall, a hospitalization, an overdose, or a well-meaning grandfather doing something that can be described as isolating her." I said I would be careful. I was not careful enough. That is a thing I have to carry. We filed on Wednesday. Junie entered her appearance for Marlowe, requested independent evaluation, and moved to continue. Judge Sarrett granted it on the Friday, and set the matter for the 9th of December, and for about 4 hours, I felt like a man who had won something. Then the next part started. I need to tell you about the 12 days between the 20th of October and the 2nd of November, and I need to tell it the way it happened, rather than the way it makes sense, because that is the whole point. Marlo was getting worse. Not steadily, in patches. Monday the 20th, she was fine. She came into the house on her own for the first time, at 8 in the evening, and sat at the kitchen table and ate 2 bowls of chili and asked me whether the stentura still worked. I told her it did. She put 1 finger on the keys and did not press them. We talked for an hour about nothing. She laughed at something on my refrigerator, a photograph of Iris in a paper crown at a birthday she did not want. It was the best hour I had spent with anybody in 4 years. Tuesday the 21st, she did not come out of the garage until 4 in the afternoon. I went out at 11 and knocked and got nothing, and I let it go, because a 19-year-old sleeping until 11 is not a crisis. At 2, I knocked again. At 3:30 I got the ladder out and looked in the side window through the thin place in the old paint, and I could see her on the cot, on her side, and I could see the sleeping bag rising, and I climbed back down and sat on the step. She came out at 4 minutes past 4, with a face like a wet cloth, and asked me why I had moved the truck. I had not moved the truck. The truck was where it had been since she drew the floor plan. Wednesday, fine. She helped me stack wood. She was quick and funny, and she noticed a bad piece of trim over my back door that I had stopped seeing in 2009. Thursday, she had a nosebleed that would not stop for 20 minutes, and left the sink looking like something out of a bad night, and she was embarrassed about it, and she cleaned it with bleach before I could tell her not to bother. Friday, fine. Saturday, she lost the whole day. She sat on the step in the sun at 9 in the morning with a cup of coffee, and the next time I looked, at 2:30, she was on the same step, and the coffee was full and cold in her hand. I asked her what she had been thinking about. Marlo looked at the cup. Then she looked up at me and asked, with no drama in it at all, whether it was still morning. I put down my sandwich and did not pick it up again. That is the sentence I wrote in the folder that night, and it is the sentence I go back to. Because I did not do anything with it. I wrote it down. I dated it. And then I went back to my theory, which was about money, and I spent the following week on the telephone with an annuity company in Pennsylvania. I should explain how my daughter stayed in the picture, because that was my doing. Junie Ashcraft had told me plainly, do not let this look like isolation. If a court hears that a 73-year-old man moved a girl into his garage and cut her off from her mother, the court will not hear anything else. So we made an arrangement, and Georgia agreed to it in a phone call that lasted 4 minutes and had crying at both ends. Georgia would come by twice a week, Tuesdays and Fridays. She would not bring Trent. She would bring groceries, because that was the thing my daughter could do with her hands when everything else was on fire. She brought good food, rotisserie chickens, a bag of clementines, yogurt in the little cups, and every single time, a case of the bottled peach tea Marlo has been drinking since she was 14 years old, 12 bottles, in a cardboard flat with a plastic handle. I carried those cases into the garage myself, every one of them. I want to say that out loud on this recording, because I have not said it out loud very often. Georgia and Marlo were awkward with each other. There was one Friday in early November when I watched them from the kitchen window, standing 8 feet apart in my driveway for 11 minutes, and neither of them moved closer, and neither of them left. I thought that was grief. I thought I was watching a mother and daughter who had said unforgivable things and did not have a road back yet. Now here is the part where somebody outside my family saved us, and I want to say her name properly, because the whole thing turns on a woman who did not have to open her mouth. Ivy Sandoval was the lead pharmacy technician at Bell & Drug on Selma Road. I had been going to that counter for 11 years, since my second knee. She had filled Iris's antiemetics, and she had cried at the register the day I came in, and said I would not be needing the refill. I was in there on the 4th of November, picking up my own blood pressure medication. I gave my name at the counter, and Ivy pulled the bag, and then she stopped, with the bag in her hand, and looked past me at the store. She asked me, quietly, if I was still on the Hale account. I said I did not know what that meant. Ivy said years ago I had been listed as an authorized pickup for my granddaughter, back when Georgia had her wisdom teeth out and I did the running. She said it was probably nothing. Then she stood there for a second, with her jaw set, and she said, "Come around to the consultation window." The consultation window at Bell & Drug is a plexiglass half booth, with a stool and a blood pressure cuff nobody has used since the pandemic. I sat on the stool. Ivy turned the monitor toward me, which I understand now she was not supposed to do. She said, "This is her fill history." I read it, 8 months of it. 11 fills in Marlowe's name since March. 3 different pharmacies, 2 of them chains out on the bypass. Lorazepam, 2 milligrams, 30 tablets, 6 times. Zolpidem, 10 milligrams, 30 tablets, 5 times. Every one of them written by the same prescriber, Amos Litchfield, MD. I read it 3 times. Then I asked Ivy the only question that mattered. I asked who picked them up. Ivy Sandoval said, in a careful voice with something underneath it, that at her store it was never the patient. She said it was a man on the authorized list. She said he was polite, he came at the end of the day, and he always paid cash, even though there was insurance on the account. I asked if she could tell me his name. She said she could not tell me anything from the system. Then she said that she remembered him, because he had a Cardinal Meadow badge clipped to his belt, and she had asked him once, making conversation, how the fountain in the lobby was working out, and he had told her about the pump. I sat on that stool in the plexiglass booth in the back of a drugstore on Selma Road, and I felt the floor tilt. Because my granddaughter had told me, standing in a cold doorway, that she had never in her life been prescribed anything. And here was 8 months of paper saying otherwise, written by a doctor she had never met, picked up in cash by a man in a Cardinal Meadow badge. Now, I want you to watch me get it wrong again, because I did. Sitting there, this is what I concluded. They were building her. They were manufacturing a psychiatric history. 11 fills is a chart. A chart is what you hand a judge when you want a 19-year-old declared incompetent. The drugs did not have to go into her at all. The paper was the point. That was a smart theory. It was also half of one, and the half I could not see was the half that was going into her body. 12 bottles at a time, carried in by me. I asked Ivy if she would put any of it in writing. She looked at me for a long moment. She had 2 kids and a job with benefits, and I was asking her to sign something about a controlled substance record she had shown a customer. Ivy Sandoval said, "Bring me a subpoena, and I will tell the truth on the record, and I will not lie for anybody. And if you cannot get a subpoena, come back and I will think about it again." That was more than I had any right to. I drove home. Marlowe was in the driveway with her sleeves pushed up, scrubbing the rust ring off the bottom of my mailbox post with a wire brush, and she looked up at me with a smear of orange on her forehead and said the post had been driving her crazy for a month. She was so much herself in that moment that I decided not to say anything until I was sure. 12 days. That is what that decision cost. The next morning, I called Amos Litchfield's office in Springfield and asked for an appointment for my granddaughter. I gave her name and date of birth. The woman on the phone put me on hold for 90 seconds and came back and said that the practice was not accepting new patients. I said Marlo was not a new patient. I said she had been evaluated on September the 12th. There was a pause on the line, and then the woman said, in a voice that had suddenly gotten careful, that she was not able to discuss patient matters, and would I like to leave a number. I gave her my number. Nobody called back. 2 hours later, Trent Fowler called me. 2 hours, not 2 days. He was warm. He asked how Marlo was doing in the garage, and he laughed a little, the way you do about a harmless eccentricity. Then he said he had heard I was making calls, and that he understood, and he wanted me to know there was nothing to hide. I asked him how he had heard. Trent Fowler said, without a beat of hesitation, Amos and I go back. And then he said, the thing that I put in the folder that night, dated and initialed, and that I read out loud to a room of 140 people 10 weeks later. He said, Hollis, I would hate for anyone to think you are working an angle on that girl's settlement. I hung up and stood in my kitchen and understood 2 things at once. The first was that I had just told my son-in-law exactly where I was looking. The second was that he had answered it inside of 2 hours, which meant he had a line into that medical practice, and it meant he was watching me, and it meant that from that day forward, everything I did was a move he could see. That night I called my son. Gideon is my youngest, 47, and he sells commercial flooring out of a warehouse in Dayton. He is a decent man who has spent his life going around trouble the way water goes around a rock. He and Trent golf. That is the shape of it. I told him the whole thing. The petition, the affidavit from the director of nursing, the doctor who had never met her, the fills. Gideon listened for 11 minutes without saying a word, which for him is a long time. Then he asked me a question, in a voice I did not recognize as my son's. He asked me whether I had considered that Marlo might actually be sick. I said that a girl who is sick does not have 11 pharmacy fills under a prescriber she has never met. My son said that people who are unwell lie about doctors all the time. He said he had seen a documentary about it. He said, Dad, I love her, but she has been strange since her father died, and everybody has been walking around it. I asked him if he would sign an affidavit, just a statement, that in his observation, Marlo was oriented and capable. Gideon said no. He did not dress it up, and I will give him that much. He said no, and then he said the reason, which was that Trent had put him in front of a chain in Columbus that was going to buy 11,000 square yards of carpet tile for 4 buildings, and it had not closed yet. I said, 11,000 square yards. My son said, Dad. I said good night, and I hung up, and I sat there, and I thought about my wife, and what she would have done to him, with about 4 sentences, and how she was not here to do it. Sunday the 9th of November, Georgia asked us to dinner. Junie Ashcraft told me to go. She said a family that eats together does not look like a family in crisis, and that the court's investigator would be interviewing everyone in a matter of weeks, and every dinner that happened was a paragraph that could not be written about isolation. So I drove my granddaughter to my daughter's house, and I walked her in the door myself. That is another one I carry. The house is a split level out past the reservoir, with a poured concrete patio that Trent added in 2019. Georgia had made a pot roast. There were cloth napkins, which there had never been in that house when Marlo was small. Trent met us at the door and hugged Marlo. She stood inside the hug with her arms down. Dinner ran an hour and 40 minutes, and it was the most pleasant evening I have ever wanted to leave. Trent carved. He asked me about the truck's transmission, and listened to the answer. He told a story about a resident at Cardinal Meadow, a 91-year-old named Alvin Puckett, who had spent 4 decades laying brick, and who had opinions about the mortar joints on the facility's new entry columns. And it was a good story, and it was funny, and Trent told it with affection. I sat at that table and watched my son-in-law be a likable man, and it was the most frightening 90 minutes of the whole autumn, and I could not have told you why. Marlo ate almost nothing. She cut things. She moved them. Twice, Trent got up and refilled her glass from the pitcher without being asked. Twice. At about the hour mark, Georgia said something about how good it was to have everyone at the table, and Trent put his hand over hers, and then he turned to me and asked, in a friendly voice, whether my attorney had explained to me what the December hearing would look like. I said I understood the process. Trent said he was sure I did. Then he said, still friendly, I just want to make sure nobody has told you this is a fight, because it is not. Nobody is on opposite sides here. I said that a guardianship petition has a caption with 2 names on it, and the word versus is doing something. Georgia looked at her plate. Trent smiled and said, Hollis, you spent your whole career writing down what people said. You know better than anyone that a transcript is not the same as the truth. I said, a transcript is a good deal closer to it than most things. He laughed. He genuinely laughed, and he said fair enough, and he passed me the potatoes. Then he turned to Marlo and asked her, in the same warm voice, how she was sleeping. And my granddaughter, who had said maybe 9 words in 90 minutes, put down her fork and looked at her stepfather across the table and said, better. I sleep with the door locked. The room went so quiet I could hear the furnace. Trent Fowler's face did not change, but his hand did. His right hand was on the stem of his water glass, and the fingers went white at the knuckles for about 1.5 seconds, and then came back. I have watched people react to sentences for a living. That is not surprise. Surprise goes to the face. That was a man absorbing an impact somewhere below the neck and refusing to let it up. He said, warmly, that whatever helps. We left 20 minutes later. In the truck at the end of the driveway, before I pulled out, I asked my granddaughter what she meant. Marlo was looking straight ahead at the road with her hands flat on her knees, and she said, I want him to know I am not asleep. That night, back home, she went into the garage and slid the bolt, and I stood at my sink and did what I had done every night for a month, which was write out the evening. I got to the part with the pitcher, and I stopped. Twice, Trent refilled her glass without being asked. I had that in my hand, and I looked at it, and it went past me, like a car with its lights off. Monday, Marlo could not get up. I knocked at 9, at 10, at 11. At 11:40, I heard her moving, and she got the bolt open on the 3rd try, and she was gray. She made it 4 steps into my kitchen, and put her hand out for the counter, and missed it. She went down on my kitchen floor on her right side, and her head came off the linoleum about 1 inch, and went back down. I am 73 years old, with a rebuilt knee, and I got down on that floor and put my hand under her head. She was breathing. Her eyes came open and did not find me for 4 or 5 seconds. And then my granddaughter said something to the ceiling in a slurred, sleepy, almost peaceful voice, and it was the first true piece of the whole thing, and I did not understand it for another 12 days. She said, I only had one. I called the squad. I want to be clear that I knew what I was doing when I dialed. Junie Ashcraft had told me in a converted dental office 3 weeks earlier, that a hospitalization was the kind of fact that gets a 19-year-old declared incompetent in an afternoon. I knew it while the phone was ringing. I called anyway because she was on my floor. They came in 9 minutes. 2 paramedics. One of them a heavy young man named Dale, who talked to her the whole time, in the voice you would use with a spooked horse. Blood pressure, 90/58. Pulse 52. Blood sugar normal. Pupils, he said, sluggish. At the hospital they ran fluids and kept her 6 hours, and discharged her at 6:20 in the evening, with a printed sheet about hydration. I asked the emergency physician, a tired woman about my daughter's age, whether they had done a toxicology screen. She said they had run a basic panel. I asked what a basic panel covers. She said alcohol and the standard drugs of abuse. I asked whether that included benzodiazepines. She said their screen did not break that out unless it was ordered, and it had not been ordered, and by now it would be past the window anyway. I asked her to order it. She looked at me with more patience than I deserved and said that they could not run a screen on a competent adult without her consent, and that the patient had been asked at intake if she was taking any medications, and had said no. I turned around, and my granddaughter was sitting on the edge of the bed with her socks on, pale, holding the discharge paper in both hands, and she was watching me. I asked her, in front of the doctor, if she would consent to a drug screen. Marlowe said yes, without 1 second of hesitation. That is not what a person hiding a pill habit does. I saw the doctor register it, and I saw her decide it did not change anything, because it was 6:20 in the evening, and there were 14 people in the waiting room. By the time we got the order in, they drew at 7:05. The result came back the following afternoon on the patient portal, and it was negative for everything they tested, and I want to tell you exactly why that meant nothing, because it is the kind of thing nobody explains. The window. Lorazepam clears the blood in about 12 hours. She had gone down on my kitchen floor at 11:40 in the morning, and they drew her at 7:05 at night, which is 19.5 hours after anything she drank the night before at my daughter's table. A clean screen taken too late is not evidence of innocence. It is a blank page. And a blank page in a file goes into the record as tested, negative, no substances involved, consistent with an underlying psychiatric condition. I handed them that. I handed it to them myself, and I paid the $1,100 hospital bill for the privilege. The following Monday, the 17th of November, my theory died. I had been working the settlement for a month. I had a copy of the 2016 settlement agreement from Danny Hale's attorney, who had retired to Sarasota, and mailed me 40 pages without being asked twice. God bless him. I had the name of the issuing life company in Pennsylvania. I had spent 4 separate mornings on hold. On the 17th, I got a woman in structured settlement administration, named Denise, who actually knew her job, and she walked me through it in 20 minutes, and by the end of it, I was sitting at my kitchen table with the phone against my ear and a cold feeling working up the back of my neck. The annuity was intact. Every payment on schedule, none accelerated, no assignment requests, no factoring company inquiries, no correspondence on the file in 4 years, except an address change in 2021. Then Denise explained the part I had not understood, and she explained it kindly. The way you explain a thing to a man you can hear is having a bad month. An Ohio guardian of the estate does not get to touch a structured settlement. The payments would go into a guardianship account under court supervision, itemized, reported annually, audited by the probate court, and the guardian cannot spend $1 of awards funds without an entry from the judge. Any guardian who tried it in Clark County would land in front of Judge Hattie Surratt, who, according to Junie Ashcraft, has removed 4 guardians in 6 years and referred 2 of them for prosecution. I asked Denise, slowly, whether a person who wanted that money could get at it through a guardianship. She said, "Sir, a guardianship is the hardest possible way to steal from someone. That is what it is built to prevent. 5 weeks. 5 weeks of phone calls and certified mail, and a legal pad with columns on it, and I had built a case against a man for wanting $412,000 that a court would have counted in front of him twice a year for 11 years. He did not want the money." I put the phone down on my kitchen table and looked out the window at my garage, where my grandchild was living behind a bolt she had installed herself. And for the first time in my life, I understood the feeling of standing in a familiar room and not knowing which direction the door is in. If it was not the money, then what was worth a fabricated clinical record, a bought physician, a sworn statement from a director of nursing, and 400 billable hours of a man's life? And then it got worse, because on Wednesday the 19th, Junie Ashcraft called me at 8:40 in the morning and asked me to come down. Trent's counsel had filed a supplemental affidavit, 4 pages. I read it in the little waiting room with the hygienist's window. It stated that the respondent's maternal grandfather, Hollis Kern, had removed the respondent from her family home and housed her in an unheated detached garage, that he had installed, or permitted the installation of, a locking mechanism preventing access, that he had made unsolicited inquiries to the respondent's treating physician and to the administrator of the annuity holding the respondent's settlement funds, which inquiries were documented and attached as exhibits. Exhibits, he had my phone calls logged with dates, and then the sentence that I read 4 times. Affiant believes the respondent's grandfather has a financial interest in the disposition of the respondent's settlement and has isolated the respondent for that purpose, and requests the court consider the appointment of a disinterested guardian if the court is not inclined to appoint the applicant. He had taken the exact accusation and put my name in it. Junie Ashcraft took her glasses off and rubbed the bridge of her nose and told me, without any softening at all, that this was now a 2-front case. She said the court investigator would be in my house within 10 days. She said that a garage with a bolt on it was going to be photographed. She said that from this moment, I should assume that anything I did would be characterized in the worst available light, and that the worst available light was now aimed at me. I asked her what she wanted me to do. Junie said, "Insulate the garage." I did not understand. She said, "Mr. Kern, when the investigator comes, that room needs to look like a place where somebody lives, not a place where somebody is kept. Drywall it, heat it, put a rug down, and do it this week." So on Saturday the 22nd of November, at 73 years old, I bought 9 sheets of half-inch drywall, 4 rolls of R13, a box of screws, and a case of construction adhesive, and my granddaughter and I started on the garage. She was good that day. That is the thing about the good days. She was sharp and steady, and she snapped a chalk line better than I could, and she made a joke about the fact that we were remodeling a room so that a stranger with a clipboard would approve of it, and we both laughed until I had to put my hand on the workbench. We started with the ceiling, because the insulation went in the rafters first. I put the ladder up and went to clear the old junk off the ceiling joists. 40 years of a marriage ends up on the joists of a garage. Storm windows, a crib rail, 2 boxes of Iris's canning jars with her handwriting on the tape, the letters going uphill the way they always did. And behind the canning jars, wedged into the corner where the joist meets the plate, was a bread bag. the plastic kind, twisted and knotted at the top, with the loaf's own wrapper still around whatever was inside it. I brought it down. Marlo was on the other side of the garage cutting insulation, and she did not see me. I untwisted it, standing on the second step of the ladder. Inside was a wire-bound notebook, 5 by 8, red cover, the cheap kind they sell 3 for $1 in August, warped along one edge like it had been rained on and dried. I opened it, page after page after page of what any human being alive would have called scribbling. Loops and hooks and short slashes, 4 or 5 to a line, running down the page in a narrow column, with the right 2/3 of every sheet left blank. Anybody else in the world would have thrown it away. I stood on a ladder in my own garage, and I read the first line, and my hands started shaking so badly I had to sit down on the top step, because it was not scribbling. It was machine shorthand, written by hand, which almost nobody does anymore. In the alphabet I taught a 9-year-old girl on my basement steps in the summer of 2015, because she asked me what the keys were for. The first line said, "They are taking it out of the comfort kits." I told Marlo I had to go inside and take my pill. I do not know why I lied. I think I needed 20 minutes alone with it before I could look at her face. I sat at my kitchen table with the red notebook and a legal pad, and I did what I had done 10,000 times in my working life, which is read shorthand and write English underneath it. It took me 4 hours and 11 minutes, and I did not get up once. Here is what my granddaughter had written. The first entry was dated the 9th of February. "Comfort kits," she wrote. In hospice care, when a resident is dying, the facility keeps a small sealed box in the room. Morphine sulfate concentrate, lorazepam liquid, haloperidol, atropine. It is there so that at 2 in the morning, when a 90-year-old man cannot get his breath, the nurse does not have to wait 90 minutes for a pharmacy delivery. It is a mercy. It is also, in a building with 81 beds and a locked box in a dozen of them, about the least supervised controlled substance in American medicine. When the resident dies, the kit is supposed to be destroyed. 2 staff members, 1 wasting and 1 witnessing, both signing the log. Marlo had written on the 9th of February that she had carried a discharge box out to the dumpster with a kit in it that still had weight in the bottles. She was 19. She was an activities aide, making $11.40 an hour. She ran bingo and painted fingernails and pushed wheelchairs to the dining room. She was not supposed to know what a wasting log was. She learned. 22nd of February. Asked SD about the box. SD said I was mistaken. 4th of March. SD asked me if I was happy here. 11th of March. TF asked me to close out the activities budget in his office. He gave me a Coke. 16th of March. Slept 14 hours. 24th of March. Could not remember driving home. And from there, for 6 months, 2 columns running side by side down the pages of a notebook the size of a paperback. One column was the building, room numbers, times, initials, bottle levels she had eyeballed through the plastic, the dates of deaths and the dates the kits went out, whose signature was on which waste log, and one entry, on the 18th of May, that said, "Waste log 214 has MC signature." MC was on vacation, saw her post pictures. The other column was herself. Slept 14 hours. Could not remember driving home. Nosebleed. Dropped a tray. Hands wrong. Woke on the floor. Lost Tuesday. Lost most of a week. Cannot remember my own PIN. She had been keeping a record of her own erasure, in machine shorthand, on the joists of my garage, because she could no longer trust her own head to hold anything. That is what I sat at my kitchen table and understood at about the 2-hour mark. And I put my forehead down on my own arms, and I made a sound I have not made since the morning Iris stopped breathing. Then I made myself finish it, because there was more. Room 112. Wendell Poe was 88 years old. Retired from the railroad. On hospice for metastatic bone cancer since June. Bone cancer is the one where the pain is the whole disease. Marlowe's entries for August the 21st, the 22nd, and the 23rd all said the same thing in slightly different ways. 112, crying out all evening. Marar says medicated at 6 and 10. 112 again. Nobody goes in. Told SD. SD said he is agitated, not in pain. 112 third night. Sat in the hall outside 112, from 9 to 11. Nobody came. He asked me for his wife. Wendell Poe died on the 24th of August, at 4:50 in the morning. The kit in his room was logged as destroyed at 8:15 that morning. Wasted and witnessed. 2 signatures. Marlowe's entry says, kit went out in the green bag. TF carried it himself. I have never seen him carry anything. The last 3 entries in the notebook were the 26th, the 27th, and the 28th of August. 26th. SD saw me writing in the break room. She asked what it was. I said it was for my class. 27th. TF asked me to stay after. He said people who are not well see patterns. He said he was worried about me, and he has talked to my mother. 28th. I am going to write this down every day, because I do not trust what I remember anymore. If someone finds this and can read it, my name is Marlowe Jean Hale, and I am not crazy. That is the last line in the book. She quit the next day. The chin stitches were the 29th. I want to tell you what happened in my chest when I finished, because I have thought about it a great deal. It was not rage. Rage came later, and it came in a form I did not expect. What I felt was a kind of terrible order. Every crooked thing went straight at once. It was never about $412,000. It was never about her father's money. My son-in-law did not want anything Marlowe had. He wanted her not to be believed. That is the entire crime, and everything else in it is plumbing. A 19-year-old girl with a notebook is a witness. A witness can walk into the county long-term care ombudsman's office on a Tuesday afternoon and hand over 6 months of dates and room numbers, and a state pharmacy board investigator can pull 9 waste logs and a signature from a woman who was in Gatlinburg, and a man loses a career, a license, a facility, and the better part of 20 years of his life. But an incompetent person cannot be a witness. That is not a metaphor. A guardianship finding is a judicial determination about the reliability of a human being, on the record, forever. Every complaint she ever filed after that would arrive in an investigator's inbox with a note attached explaining that the complainant is under guardianship for a psychotic disorder. He was not stealing from her. He was building a lid to put on her, and the drugs were how he was getting the paperwork. I sat there, and one more thing came up out of the floor at me. The fills were not paper. I had told myself for 3 weeks that the 11 fills were a manufactured chart, that nobody was actually putting anything into my grandchild. 11 fills. 6 of lorazepam, 5 of zolpidem, 30 tablets each. 330 tablets, picked up in cash by a man with a Cardinal Meadow badge. That is not a chart. That is a supply. And I had watched him fill her glass twice at his own dinner table. I went out to the garage. She was sitting on an upturned bucket with the box cutter in her hand and a strip of insulation across her lap. and there was pink fiber in her hair. And she looked up at me, and she saw my face, and she went still. I sat down on the second step of the ladder, so we would be level. I held up the red notebook. I said, "I can read this." My granddaughter looked at that notebook in my hand, and her mouth came open, and nothing came out of it. And then she put both hands over her face, and she started to cry, in a way I have only heard twice in my life, both times at gravesides. She had written it for 6 months. She had hidden it in a bread bag. She had chosen my garage, out of every place on earth, because it was the one building in the world, with a person inside it, who could read her handwriting. She said, through her hands, "I did not know if it was real. I did not know if I made it up." I said, "It is real." Marlo took her hands down. Her face was wrecked, and her eyes were clear, and she asked me a question that I will hear until they put me in the ground. She asked, "How much of me is left?" I did not answer her. I got up and went to the corner of the garage, where the case of peach tea was sitting on the concrete, with 3 bottles gone out of it, and I picked it up and carried it into the light from the open door. I took out a bottle, sealed, cap tight, ring intact, the way it comes off the shelf. I unscrewed it. Underneath the cap, the foil liner was there, silver, printed, sealed all the way around. And in the middle of the foil, off-center, was a hole the size of the point of a pin. There were 9 bottles left in the case. I set them on the workbench in a row under the shop light, and I went over every cap with my reading glasses on, and a flashlight held at an angle. 4 of the 9 had it. A pinhole through the foil liner, always off-center, always toward the edge where the cap threads would hide it when you looked straight down. 5 did not. That is the detail that told me who I was dealing with. Not all of them, not half. 4 out of 9, at random, so that a girl who suspected something and started paying attention would find that the tea was fine on Monday, fine on Tuesday, and would talk herself out of it by Thursday. Marlo stood beside me at the workbench and looked at the row of bottles and said one sentence. She said, "I stopped drinking it in September, and then I started again, because I thought I was being crazy." I want you to hear what that man did. He did not only poison a child, he arranged it so that she would use the poisoning as further proof to herself that she was losing her mind. We did everything right that week. I want that on the record too, because it did not matter. I called Junie Ashcraft at 7:40 on Sunday morning, and she was in her office by 9, on a day the office is closed. She listened, she wrote, and then she gave me a list, and we worked the list. 1. Do not touch the caps again. She put 3 of the 4 bottles in individual paper bags, sealed and initialed across the fold, and photographed each one, and wrote a chain of custody sheet, and put them in the safe in the back of the dental office, where they used to keep the nitrous. The 4th she bagged and sealed the same way, and let me keep, because she said a man in my position was going to need something he could hold. 2. Send 2 of them to an independent analytical laboratory. We used one in Columbus that does water testing for townships. It cost $640, and they told us 10 to 14 business days. 3. Hair. Junie explained it to me the way Denise from Pennsylvania had explained the annuity, patiently, to a man who needed it. Blood tells you about the last 12 hours. Urine gives you 3 or 4 days. Hair grows about half an inch a month, and what goes into the body goes into the shaft. And a good laboratory can section it and tell you what was in a person and roughly when, going back 90 days. 90 days would reach back to the last week of August. We went on Tuesday the 25th of November to an occupational health clinic in Fairborn that does federal collections. A collector named Bree took the sample from the crown of Marlowe's head with scissors and a template, sealed it in front of us, and had us both sign the label. I felt like a man who had finally gotten his hands on the handle of the thing. The result came back on the 4th of December. Specimen unsuitable for analysis. Cosmetic treatment. My granddaughter had bleached her hair in the 2nd week of September. She had sat on the edge of her mother's bathtub with a box from the drugstore and taken herself from brown to a color she described to me as bad blonde. And she had done it, she told me later, because she had looked in the mirror one morning and not recognized the person in it, and had wanted the person in the mirror to at least be somebody she had chosen. Bleach destroys the drug in the shaft. The laboratory could not tell us anything, and would not guess. $930, 9 days of waiting, and the one piece of evidence that was inside her own body, and it was gone, because a frightened girl had wanted to look different. That was the first thing that broke. The second thing was my doing entirely, and I would like to explain it, not to be forgiven for it, but because I think a lot of people listening would have done the same. I told my daughter. It was Thursday, the 27th of November. Thanksgiving. Marlo would not go to the house, and I would not leave her. So we had grilled cheese sandwiches and canned soup in my kitchen, and it was the best Thanksgiving I have had since my wife died. At 4 in the afternoon, Georgia came by, alone. She had brought a plate covered in foil, because that is what she does, and she stood in my driveway in a good coat and asked if she could see her daughter. Marlo went into the garage and slid the bolt. I asked Georgia to come inside. I took the 4th bottle out of its paper bag and put it on my kitchen table. I put my reading glasses on the table beside it. I told her to unscrew the cap and look at the foil under the light. She did it. It took her about 10 seconds to find it. I watched my daughter's face while she looked at that pinhole, and I would give a good deal to have that 10 seconds back, because for about 4 of those seconds she knew. I have made a career of reading people while they are talking. I know what knowing looks like. She had it. Somewhere in my daughter, on some floor she does not go down to, she already had the answer, and this was the 3rd or 4th time it had come up the stairs, and then she put it away. Georgia set the bottle down and said the plastic must have a defect from the factory. I said 4 of 9 had defects, and 5 did not. She said maybe the case got dropped. I told her about the fills, 11 of them. Litchfield's name on every one. Cash. A man with a badge from her husband's building. Georgia said there had to be an explanation, and I was not letting her think. I said the notebook. That was my error. I said the word notebook. I did not show it to her. I did not tell her what was in it. I told my daughter that Marlo had kept a written record from inside Cardinal Meadow, and that I had read it, and that it was going to end her husband's career. I said it because I wanted to save her. I wanted her to have the chance to be standing on the right side of it before it came down. I wanted my daughter back. She left at 4:20. At 6:50 that evening, my telephone rang, and it was Trent Fowler wishing me a happy Thanksgiving. That is all it was. 90 seconds. He hoped we had eaten well. He said Georgia had come home upset. He said he hoped I understood that everyone was doing their best. At the end of it, he said, "It has been a hard year for all of us, Hollis. Get some sleep." He knew. Friday morning, I called Junie and told her what I had done, and she was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, in a flat voice, that we needed to get the notebook copied and out of my house that day, and that she wanted Marlo out of that garage and somewhere with a different address for a week. I said Marlo would not go anywhere. Junie said, "Then move fast." I photographed every page that afternoon with my phone, 141 pages, and I emailed them to Junie's office and to myself, and I drove the original to the office, and she put it in the safe with the bottles. That was Friday. They came on Monday, the 1st of December, at 10 minutes to 5 in the afternoon. A Clark County deputy in a marked car, and behind him a white sedan with 2 people in it from Adult Protective Services, and behind that, parked on the road rather than in my driveway, my daughter's Honda. The deputy was about 35, and he was polite, and he was uncomfortable, and he did his job. Emergency ex parte order, Probate Court of Clark County, signed at 2:15 that afternoon. Interim guardian of the person appointed, pending the hearing of December the 9th. Interim guardian, Trent A. Fowler. The grounds were in the motion, and I read the motion, standing in my own driveway, in the cold in my shirt sleeves. Emergency room admission on the 10th of November, following a fall with loss of consciousness. Refusal of psychiatric treatment. A 19-year-old adult residing in an unheated detached structure with a locking mechanism, in the sole company of a 73-year-old man with a documented financial interest. And, attached as Exhibit F, a copy of a chain of custody form from an occupational health clinic in Fairborn, showing that the grandfather had subjected the respondent to a forensic collection procedure without the knowledge or consent of her family. Exhibit F. They had gotten the collection form. There was one more page. An affidavit signed that morning by Georgia Ann Fowler, mother, stating that she had visited the residence on the 27th of November and observed her daughter to be confined behind a bolted door, and that her father had spoken to her at length about a notebook of writings her daughter had produced, which the affiant believed to be a symptom of her daughter's condition. My own child, Marlo, did not fight. That is the part I did not expect. She came out of the garage in her denim jacket, with the duffel bag she had arrived with, and she looked at the deputy and asked him if he was going to put her in the back. He said, "No, ma'am, you can ride up front with the lady." She turned around and looked at me, and there was nothing in her face at all. No fear. She had gone somewhere behind her own eyes, the way you do when a thing you have been expecting for a long time finally arrives on schedule. She said, "It is fine, Grandpa." They put my granddaughter in a white sedan and drove her to the house with the poured concrete patio, and my daughter's Honda pulled out behind them, and I stood in my driveway until the taillights turned at the reservoir. Then I went into my garage and stood in the middle of it. The drywall was up on the ceiling and 2 walls, and there was a rug down, and the space heater was still running, and the cot was made because she made it every morning. The bolt was on the inside of the door. It does no good at all from where I was standing. I did not sleep that night, and I did not drink, and I did not sit in the dark with a photograph. I want to be honest about what an old man actually does in that situation, because it is less dignified than the stories make it. I cleaned. I swept out the garage at 1 in the morning. I coiled the extension cord. I folded the sleeping bag on the cot and squared the corners. Then I sat at my kitchen table and opened the folder and started a new page and dated it, because it was already tomorrow. The hearing on the 9th of December lasted 19 minutes. I sat in the second row, in the same courtroom where I had spent 11 years of my working life, sitting 4 feet from the bench with a machine on a tripod, and for the first time, I was one of the people in the pews. Marlo came in with the interim guardian's counsel and with Trent, and she sat down, and she did not look for me. I got 11 seconds with her in the hallway before they took her out. She was 8 days into that house. Her hair was clean and combed, which meant somebody had done it for her. She was wearing a sweater I had never seen. When she said my name, it came out in 2 pieces, with a gap in the middle where the second syllable should have been, and her eyes went to the left of my face and stayed there. 8 days. Junie moved for the independent evaluation to be expedited. Trent's counsel joined in the request, warmly, and said his client wanted a full and unhurried clinical picture, more than anyone in the room. Judge Hattie Sarrett continued the matter to the 20th of January and appointed a court evaluator out of Dayton, a psychiatrist named Dr. Pearl. 6 weeks. In the parking lot, Junie Ashcraft stood beside my truck and told me the truth, which is what I have always paid her for. She said, "Hollis, if Dr. Pearl evaluates that girl in the state she was in today, he will find her incapacitated, and he will be right, and there will not be a thing anybody can do about it." I asked what would happen then. She said the guardianship becomes permanent. Trent becomes guardian of the person, and guardian of the person means he decides where she lives. The laboratory report from Columbus came on the 17th of December. Both bottles. Lorazepam, in solution, 4.1 milligrams in one and 3.8 in the other. For about an hour, I was a man who had won. Then Junie explained why I had not, and I sat in the waiting room with the hygienist's window and listened to a 68-year-old woman take my one piece of evidence apart in 4 minutes. The bottles came out of my garage, my custody, my granddaughter's residence. Their filing already accused me of a financial motive. A bottle with a hole in the seal proves that somebody put a benzodiazepine in a beverage. It does not have a name on it, and the 2 people with the most access to that case of tea were a girl the court had been told was drug-seeking and an old man the court had been told wanted her money. I said that Trent bought the tea. Junie said, "Prove it. Cash. No receipt. His wife carried it." Then she said the sentence that set the last month of my life. She said, "The drug did not come from a store, Hollis. Nobody fills 330 tablets to squirt liquid lorazepam through a foil seal. Liquid concentrate comes from one place. If you want to hang this on him, you do not need what is in the bottle. You need where it came from." Cardinal Meadow. 81 beds, on the state route, with a fountain in the entry and a fireplace that runs on a switch. I had been in that building exactly twice, both times for Christmas parties, and I had shaken hands with people whose names I did not keep. Now, here is where being the most forgettable man in every room finally paid. The Monday before Christmas, I called Cardinal Meadows' main line and asked for the activities director. Her name was Corinne Yates, 26 years old, 6 months in the job, running programming for 81 residents on a budget that would not cover a decent used car. I told her I was a retired court reporter with time on my hands and a wife who had died in a hospital bed in my dining room, and that I wanted to volunteer as a visitor. Corinne Yates said, and I could hear her sit up straight, that she had 11 residents who had not had a visitor in over a year. She matched me with Alvin Puckett, room 119. Alvin was 91. He had laid brick in Springfield and Dayton and Columbus for 43 years. He had buried a wife in 1998 and a son in 2016, and there was nobody else. He was sharp as a tack 4 days out of 7 and gone the other 3. And he never once remembered my name and always remembered that he liked me, which is a trade most people would take. The first afternoon I sat with him, he took my hand and turned it over and looked at my palm and said, "You never worked." I said I typed. Alvin Puckett said, "For how long?" I said 38 years. He thought about that, and then he said, "All right, that counts," and he let go of my hand, and that was the beginning of the best friendship of my old age. I visited 19 times between the 22nd of December and the 15th of January. I came in the evenings, most of them, between 6 and 9, because that is when a building of that kind is thin. Days have administrators and therapists and family. Evenings have 2 aides on a hall, and a med pass at 8. I signed the visitor log every time. Hollis Kern, resident visiting, A. Puckett, in and out times. I want you to remember that log, and I sat in the lobby. That is the whole method. There is nothing clever in it. I sat in a wing chair by the fireplace that runs on a switch, 20 feet from the nurse's station, and 40 feet from the door of the medication room, with a spiral notebook open on my knee and a pen in my hand, and I wrote. Nobody looked at me. Not once in 19 visits. I was a white-haired man in a cardigan with a notebook, waiting for someone. There is no more invisible object in an American building. Staff walked past me and finished their sentences. 2 aides argued about a schedule change 4 feet from my chair. A nurse took a phone call from her sister about a car payment, and I heard the whole thing. I wrote all of it, verbatim, in machine shorthand, by hand, in a narrow column, down the left side of the page, at about 140 words a minute, which is slow for me, but faster than anybody talks. Then I went home and transcribed the pages into English on my kitchen table, dated and timed, and printed them, and initialed the corner of every page. By the 10th of January, I had 94 pages. Most of it was nothing. Schedules, a birthday, a man complaining about the thermostat. That is what a record is. You do not get to know in advance which 4 lines matter, so you take all of it, and that is the difference between a transcript and a memory. But some of it was not nothing. On the 29th of December, at 7:48 in the evening, an aide named Tamika Ford said to another aide, in the hall behind my chair, that 122's kit had gone out before the funeral home came, and she was not signing anything else she did not watch. On the 2nd of January, at 8:20, a nurse told Corinne Yates that she should stop putting hospice families on the tour route. And on the 5th of January, at 6:55 in the evening, Cheryl Deitz, RN, Director of Nursing, stood at the end of the hall with a phone to her ear and told whoever was on the other end that the girl was fine, that her mother had it handled, and that after the 20th, nobody was going to care what she said. After the 20th. The hearing was the 20th. I wrote that line down in shorthand with my hand steady and my heart going like a bird in a box, and then I sat in that chair for another 40 minutes and read a magazine about golf so that leaving would not look like leaving. The 6th of January was the night I got the thing that took the building down, and it happened because Alvin Puckett had a bad hip. He wanted ice cream. The freezer with the ice cream in it is in the small service kitchen off the North Hall, and residents are supposed to ask staff, and staff at 8 o'clock at night are 2 people for 28 rooms. So I went and got it myself, which I had done 4 or 5 times by then, and on the way back, I heard voices, and I stopped walking. The medication room at Cardinal Meadow is a windowless room, about 9 feet by 12, with a half door and a keypad. There is an alcove across from it, with a linen cart in it. I stood behind the linen cart, with a paper cup of butter pecan in my left hand, and my notebook against the wall, and I wrote for 4 minutes and 40 seconds. I am going to read you what I wrote, because I read it out loud 10 days later, to a room of 140 people, and because those 4 minutes are the reason a man is in Marion Correctional this evening, instead of running a facility with a fountain in the lobby. Cheryl Deitz said that 104 was going to go this week, and she was not doing another one with a green bag. Trent Fowler said that was the 2nd time she had said that this month. Deitz said the Ford girl was talking to the aides. Fowler said Ford is a warm body who needs the shift. Dietz said Pearl is coming on the 20th, and asked what happens if the girl holds it together for an hour. Fowler said she will not. Dietz asked him how he could know that, and my son-in-law said, in the flat voice of a man discussing an inventory problem, because I am running her at 4, and she cannot hold a fork. Then he said one more thing, and I want you to hear it exactly, because in 9 days, in front of a jury, nobody was able to make it sound like anything else. He said, after the 20th, she goes on the 22nd, and then it is a care plan and not a conversation. I stood behind a linen cart, holding melting ice cream, and I understood that the 22nd of January was a date somebody had already reserved. I brought Alvin his butter pecan. I sat with him 25 more minutes. He told me about a chimney he had laid in 1974 on a house in Yellow Springs, 31 feet, and how the lead flashing was the part everybody gets wrong. I wrote a page of that too, because my hands would not stay still, and it gave them something to do. I signed out at 9:14 p.m. The next morning, I stopped Tamika Ford in the parking lot at the end of her shift. She was 24 years old, in maroon scrubs, with a car seat in the back of a Corolla. She had every reason on earth to walk away from a strange old man in a cold parking lot. I told her my name, and I told her who my granddaughter was. Tamika Ford stood there for about 6 seconds, and then she said, Marlo. She said Marlo had been the only person in that building who ever helped her turn a resident when she was short a person. She said Marlo had cried in the linen closet in August and would not say why. She said she had heard the girl was in a psych hospital. I said the girl was in her mother's house, being given lorazepam in bottled tea, and that a bed had been reserved for her in the memory care wing on the 22nd. Tamika Ford put her hand over her mouth. Then she said something that told me she had been waiting 11 months for a person to ask her a direct question. She said, I have pictures of the waste logs on my phone, 14 of them, photographed over 5 months, because a 24-year-old aide with an infant did not trust what she was being asked to sign her name to, and did not know who on this earth she could show them to. I want to say something here about who actually stops a thing like this. It is never the people with the letterhead. It was a pharmacy technician who turned a monitor around. It was an activities director who wanted somebody to visit the lonely ones. It was a nursing aide making $15 an hour with 14 photographs on a cracked phone. On the 9th of January, an envelope came to my house with no return address. Inside was a grocery receipt from the Kroger on Bechdel Avenue, dated the 7th, for bread and eggs and dish soap, $17.04. On the back, in pencil, in machine shorthand, in handwriting I had watched form itself on my basement steps when she was 9 years old, I stopped the tea. He puts it in something else now. I sleep 16 hours. Mom cries at me. Pearl comes on the 20th. On the 20th, I will not be able to speak. If you can hear me, do it before then. To do it before then. I sat on my front step in the cold, with a grocery receipt in my hand, and I did the arithmetic. It was the 9th. The evaluation was the 20th. 11 days. And on the 10th I found the venue, and I did not have to look for it, because it had been taped to the wall beside the elevator at Cardinal Meadow since before Christmas. The Cardinal Meadow Founders and Family Dinner. Friday the 16th of January, 6 in the evening, in the Magnolia Dining Room. Please join us as we honor our administrator, Trent Fowler, recipient of the Ohio Senior Living Association Regional Administrator of the Year Award. Residents, families, staff, and community partners welcome. RSVP to Corinne Yates. His night, his building, his table, his award. 140 people invited, including, according to the flyer, the county commissioners, the chamber, 3 pastors, and the families of 81 residents, and me, because I was Alvin Puckett's visitor, and Alvin Puckett had nobody else to take him. I called Corinne Yates and RSVP'd for 2, and I called her twice more that week to add to the number. Then, I spent 5 days doing the only work I have ever been good at. I built a record. 94 pages of lobby transcript, reduced to the 11 that mattered, each certified. I still hold my registered professional reporter certificate, and my notary commission, and a certificate page in Ohio is a specific thing with specific words in it, and I typed those words at the bottom of every one. 141 photographed pages of my granddaughter's notebook, with a facing page English transcription under my certification, dated the 22nd of November. 14 photographs of controlled substance destruction logs from Tamika Ford's telephone, printed at 8 by 10, with the signature on log 214, circled in red, and a dated Facebook post from a woman named Michelle Cordova, taken in Gatlinburg on the 18th of May, printed and stapled behind it. The Columbus Laboratory Report. 4.1 milligrams. The pharmacy fill history, which Junie Ashcraft got properly with a subpoena on the 12th of January, and which Ivy Sandoval answered in 11 minutes flat, with everything in order. Amos Litchfield's $1,200 a month medical directorship agreement with Cardinal Meadow, which is a public filing, and which took Junie's paralegal 40 minutes to find. 406 pages. I made 9 copies, 9, in an accordion file, on the passenger seat of my truck. On the 13th, I went to see Odessa Pike, the regional long-term care ombudsman, in an office above a shoe store in Springfield with a plant that needed water. She listened for 2 hours and asked good questions, and did not once look at her phone. At the end, she made 2 calls in front of me. One was to Ramon Bettis, an investigator with the State Board of Pharmacy. The other was to the State Survey Office. Odessa Pike asked me what I wanted. I told her I wanted 3 things. I wanted her and Mr. Bettis at the Founders' Dinner on the 16th as my guests, seated at table 9. I wanted nobody to be told before Friday, and I wanted somebody in that room with the authority to stop a 19-year-old girl from being taken to a locked wing on the 22nd. She said the 3rd one she could do. The last call I made was on the 14th, and it was to my son. I told Gideon everything. It took 40 minutes. He did not interrupt. When I was done, he asked me one question. He asked whether Marlo would be at the dinner. I said I did not know. Gideon said, "Dad, of course she will be. He is getting an award for taking care of people. He is going to have her sitting right next to him." And my son, who had told me no in November, over 11,000 square yards of carpet tile, said, "I will drive." The Magnolia Dining Room at Cardinal Meadow seats 160 at round tables of 8. On the 16th of January, they had 141, which I know because I counted from my chair while the salads came out. There was a podium at the front, with a microphone on a gooseneck and a projector screen behind it, running a slideshow of residents at a 4th of July cookout. There was a plaque on a table by the podium under a cloth. There were 2 county commissioners, the president of the chamber, a reporter from the News Sun, 3 pastors, 4 board members, 11 staff in their good clothes, and the families of 81 people who had put their mothers and fathers in that building because they believed it was a good building. Gideon drove me. He wore a suit and he did not say 10 words in the truck. I pushed Alvin Puckett in at 6:10. He had on a gray jacket over a cardigan, and he had gotten a shave, and when we came through the doors he said, loud enough for 2 tables, that the mortar joints on those entry columns were struck wrong, and always had been. We were at table 9, by the wall, 60 feet from the podium. Odessa Pike sat on my left in a green blazer. Ramon Bettis sat on my right, with a leather portfolio on his knee. Tamika Ford had asked for the night off 3 weeks earlier, and was at table 12, in a dress, with her sister beside her. Junie Ashcraft was at 11 with the accordion file at her feet. Ivy Sandoval could not come, and had not been asked to. Marlowe was at table 1. Gideon had been right. She was in a blue dress I recognized from her graduation. Her hair had been done. She was seated on Trent Fowler's right, and Georgia was on her other side, and Marlowe was sitting with her hands in her lap, looking at the centerpiece, with her mouth slightly open. A woman at their table said something to her, and my granddaughter turned her head about 4 inches and did not answer. That is what the room saw. The room saw a family that had taken in a troubled girl. It was the best thing in his whole presentation, and he had seated it at his right hand. I want to tell you what I felt, and it was not what I expected. I have a temper. I have had it since I was 17, and it is the reason I did not become the sort of man my father was. In 38 years in a courtroom, I kept it in a box and wrote down what other people did with theirs. My wife used to say I was the old lion. She meant it as a joke about the couch, but she also meant that in 41 years of marriage, she never once heard me raise my voice, and never once thought I could not. Sitting at table 9, watching a man in a good suit put his hand on my grandchild's shoulder for a photograph, I did not want to shout. I wanted the record. The record is the only thing I have ever believed in. Corinne Yates emceed. There were remarks from a board member. There was chicken and green beans and a roll. At about 7:10, Corinne came to the podium and said that before the presentation, they had asked one of their family members to say a few words about the visitor program, and she said my name. I had asked her for that 3 weeks earlier. She had been thrilled. It was the first year anybody had volunteered. I got up with a folder under my arm, and I walked 60 feet to that podium, past table 1, and Trent Fowler smiled at me as I went by and lifted his water glass about an inch. I set the folder down and adjusted the microphone. I started with Alvin. I said his name and his room number, and I said he laid brick in this county for 43 years. I said he had told me about a chimney he built in Yellow Springs in 1974, 31 feet, and that the part everybody gets wrong is not the brick, it is the flashing, the thin, hidden metal down inside the joint where nobody looks. Get the flashing wrong, I said, and the wall looks perfect for 11 years, and then rots from the inside out, and by the time it shows on the face of it, the whole thing has to come down. I said the residents in this building are the flashing. Nobody sees them. Everything rests on them anyway. There was some applause. It was a nice thought, and I meant it. Then I said that before I retired, I spent 38 years as a court reporter in this county, and that a court reporter is a person who writes down what is said, exactly, whether or not it is convenient, and that I had never in my life been able to stop doing it. I said, I have been visiting this building since the 22nd of December. 19 visits. I sign in and out every time, and the log is at the front desk, and I would ask that nobody move it. The room got quieter. Not silent. Quieter. I said, on the 29th of December, at 7:48 in the evening, in the North Hall, an employee of this facility said, that a hospice comfort kit from room 122 went out before the funeral home arrived, and that she would not sign for another one she did not witness. Somebody at a middle table said something out loud. I said, on the 5th of January, at 6:55 in the evening, in this hallway behind me, the director of nursing of this facility said into a telephone that the girl was fine, that the mother was handling it, and that after the 20th, it would not matter what she said to anybody. Cheryl Dietz stood up at table 3. I did not look at her. I turned a page. I said, on the 6th of January, beginning at approximately 8:47 in the evening, I stood in the alcove opposite the medication room, and I wrote down 4 minutes and 40 seconds of conversation between two people. I am going to read it. I certified this transcript this week under the same commission I have held since 1987, and there are 8 copies of it in this room. Trent Fowler stood up. He said, in a good, strong, pleasant voice, that they were going to take a short break. Corinne Yates, 26 years old, 6 months in the job, did not move toward the podium. I read it. I read Cheryl Dietz saying that 104 was going this week, and she was not doing another one with a green bag. I read him telling her it was the second time she had said that this month. I read her saying the Ford girl was talking to the aides. I read him calling a woman with a baby a warm body who needs the shift. The room had gone to a kind of stillness I have only felt in a courtroom twice. I read Deitz's asking what happens if the girl holds it together for an hour in front of Dr. Pearl on the 20th. And I read what my son-in-law answered, because I am running her at 4 and she cannot hold a fork. Somebody screamed. I think it was a woman at table 6. There was a sound of chairs, and then I said the only editorial sentence I permitted myself in the entire 11 minutes, and I said it quietly, without turning my head toward table 1, because I did not want 140 people looking at her. I said, the girl he is talking about is my granddaughter, and she is sitting at the front table in the blue dress. Trent Fowler came at the podium. He got about 9 feet. Ramon Bettis was out of his chair at table 9 before Trent's third step, and he had his credentials up in his hand, and he said, in a voice trained for exactly that moment, State Board of Pharmacy, sir, stop where you are. Trent stopped, and then he did the thing that finished him. And no lawyer alive could have talked a jury out of it afterward, because there were 141 witnesses and a reporter from the News Sun with a phone up. He turned to the room, and he said, loudly, that I was a mentally deteriorating old man who had been trying to get control of a settlement for a year, and that everyone should sit down and let the family handle a family matter. And Georgia Fowler stood up. My daughter had not said a word all night. She stood up at table 1, in a room where 140 people were on their feet, and she reached across and pulled her daughter's water glass away from her, and she held it up so the room could see it, and she said one sentence. She said, I have been handing it to her. Then my daughter turned to the man she had been married to for 7 years and said, loud enough for the back wall, that she had been carrying the glass, and she had been carrying the tea, and she had signed a paper against her own child, and that she had known, and that she had made herself not know, and she was not going to do it for 1 more minute. Cheryl Dietz went for the north doors, and Odessa Pike was standing in front of them, with her arms folded, and a 61-year-old ombudsman in a green blazer said to a nurse of 30 years, you do not want to leave this room right now. She did not leave. Trent Fowler was arrested in the Magnolia dining room at 11 minutes past 8 in the evening by 2 Clark County deputies who had been sitting in the parking lot since 6:30, and he did not go quietly, and the whole way out he was explaining. I did not watch it. I have seen enough men taken out of rooms. I got down off that podium, and I went to table 1, 60 feet, past all of it, and my granddaughter was still sitting down, because she could not stand up on her own. She had her hand out toward me. She had gotten it about halfway up. I took it, and Gideon got her other arm, and my daughter got the door, and the 4 of us went out through 141 people who were standing. In the parking lot, in the cold, Marlo said the first clear thing I had heard from her in 6 weeks. She said, "Did you read it out loud?" I said I did. She said, "All of it?" I said every word, and my granddaughter put her forehead against my shoulder in a parking lot on the state route, and said, "Thank you," in a voice like she had set down something she had been holding since February. Here is what happened to all of them, because you deserve the numbers and not a moral. The guardianship was dismissed on the 21st of January, 5 days after the dinner. Judge Hattie Sarrett vacated the ex parte order from the bench, and then did something I had never seen her do in 11 years of writing down her words. She made a finding on the record, unprompted, that the application had been brought for an improper purpose, and she read the case number of it out loud, twice, so the reporter would have it clean. Dr. Pearl still did his evaluation, at Junie Ashcraft's request, in March. He found Marlo Jean Hale fully capable, and he wrote in his report that in his opinion, the impairments described in the September filing were consistent with exogenous benzodiazepine administration and not with any psychiatric illness, and he said so again on the witness stand in October. Trent Fowler was indicted on 22 counts. He turned down a plea of 11 years. He went to trial in October, and it ran 9 days. He was convicted on 19 counts, 11 counts of illegal processing of drug documents, 4 counts of deception to obtain a dangerous drug, 2 counts of felonious assault for what he put into my granddaughter, 1 count of tampering with evidence, and 1 count of gross patient neglect for the 3 nights Wendell Poe spent in room 112 asking for his wife. The state charged involuntary manslaughter for Mr. Poe, and the jury could not get there on causation, because a man dying of bone cancer is dying either way, and I have made peace with that, and I understand why the law is careful. He was sentenced on the 9th of December to 19 years. Restitution of $486,000 to the facility's residents and to the Medicaid program, and $95,000 to Marlo. Cheryl Deitz pled guilty in April to 4 counts, cooperated fully, and testified for 2 days. She received 6 years. The Ohio Board of Nursing revoked her license permanently on the 12th of June. She was 58, and she had been a nurse since she was 22, and when the defense asked her on cross why she had signed a waste log for a colleague who was in Gatlinburg, she said she had needed the job. Amos Litchfield surrendered his medical license, pled to 2 felony counts, received 18 months and 3 years of supervision, was fined $60,000, and was excluded from all federal health care programs for 20 years. He is 71. The state cited Cardinal Meadow at the immediate jeopardy level in February, levied a civil penalty of $312,000, and revoked the facility's license in June. 79 residents were relocated, which is its own quiet tragedy, and I will not pretend it was not. Alvin Puckett went to a small place in Urbana, 22 beds, 10 minutes from my house. I visit on Tuesdays and Fridays. He is 93 now, and he still does not remember my name, and he still remembers that he likes me, and he has told the new maintenance man twice about the flashing. Corinne Yates testified for 40 minutes, and is now an activities director in Xenia. Tamika Ford's 14 photographs were States Exhibits 9 through 22. She finished her LPN in August. She and Marlo text. Ivy Sandoval took the stand for 11 minutes and answered every question and did not once look at the defense table. Gideon lost the carpet tile contract in Columbus, all 11,000 square yards. He testified about a phone call in November in which he told his father no. He did not have to volunteer that part, and he volunteered it. He comes on Sundays now and fixes things that are not broken. And my daughter, Georgia, was not charged. The prosecutor looked at it for 6 weeks and told me directly that he had considered it and had decided that a woman who stood up in a room of 140 people and said, "I have been handing it to her," was worth more to him as a witness than as a defendant. And I think he was right, and I do not know that I would have said so in January. She testified for 11 hours over 2 days. Junie says it was the worst thing she has ever watched in a courtroom, and Junie has been doing this since 1981. She sat there and answered questions about every glass of tea she ever carried across a room. Georgia lives in a 1-bedroom apartment over a garden center out on Route 41 and works at the garden center. She calls Marlo every Sunday. Marlo answers about 1 call in 3. I do not push her on it. People want me to. People want to hear that the mother and daughter fell into each other's arms, and it was healed, and it was not healed, and it may not be. My granddaughter lost a year of her mind, and her mother handed her the glass. 1 in 3 is a real number, and it is going up, and it is hers to set. As for Marlo, it was not fast. I want anybody listening who has somebody in this shape to hear that part. She came off it over 11 months, and it was ugly for the first 6 weeks. There was a tremor in her left hand until about August. She could not hold a thought through a paragraph until spring. There were nights in February when she woke up and could not tell me where she was. She testified in October for 4 hours. The defense went after her memory, which was the only thing they had left, and a lawyer asked her how she could possibly be certain of a date in May. And my granddaughter opened a wire-bound red notebook on the witness stand and read it into the record. She started at Clark State in January in the respiratory therapy program. She is 3 semesters in, and she has a 3.6, and she works weekends at a veterinary clinic where the only thing anybody asks her to remember is which dog bites. She still lives in my garage. That is not a figure of speech. We finished it that spring. Drywall, insulation, a mini split for the heat, a laminate floor, a real bed, a window we cut in the south wall that opens. It is a room now. She pays me $40 a month because she insisted, and I take it because she insisted. And on the door, on the inside, is the bolt she installed herself with crooked pilot holes in October, and I have never offered to replace it, and she has never asked me to. For 20 months I heard that bolt go home every night at about 11 o'clock. I would be in the kitchen with the light off, which is a habit I never lost, and I would hear it through the wall, a small sound like a bone setting, and only then would I go to bed. 2 Saturdays ago I got up at 6:10 the way I do, and I made coffee, and I took a cup out to the garage the way I have done 600 times. I knocked. She did not answer, and she does not always, because she works Friday nights now, and I put my hand on the knob to leave the cup on the step. The knob turned. I stood there in my robe on a cold morning in October, with a cup of coffee in one hand, and my other hand on a doorknob that turned all the way over, and I could not make my hand let go of it. She had not thrown the bolt, not that night, and not the night after that, and not since. I did not say anything to her about it. I have not said anything about it to this day. I set the coffee down inside the door where she would find it, and I closed the door, and I went and sat down on the step of my own garage, in my robe, at 6:15 in the morning, and I cried like a child for about 4 minutes. My wife used to call me the old lion, mostly as a joke about the couch. But she meant something by it too. She meant that a lion does not have to make a sound to end an argument, and that the quiet ones are quiet because they can afford to be. I spent 38 years writing down what other people said, in a corner, invisible, holding the exact words while everybody else in the room got to have feelings about them. I used to think that was a small life. It was not a small life. It turned out to be the only weapon in the house. A man in a good suit thought he could talk over a 19-year-old girl until nobody could hear her. He forgot that somebody in the family had spent his whole life keeping the record. Thank you for staying with this one all the way to the end. If it moved you, leave a like and tell me in the comments about the person in your life who kept the receipts when nobody believed them. If you would like to support the channel, there is a thanks button under this video. But there is no obligation, ever. And knowing you listened is enough. Subscribe to Old Lion Stories, and I will see you in the next one.